All right. So, as I said, I'm trying to avoid discussions because some of the issues are really, really hot button issues these days. But maybe when we get to the end of this chapter, it's a shortish chapter, maybe if there are questions afterwards, I'll switch off the recording and then I'll answer them honestly. But, you know, don't try and bait me, please, because I'm likely to take it at best, put my foot in my mouth big time. So, in any event, okay, we started the discourse, the Chassidic discourse, which is called Basi LeGani I Came to my garden, my sister, my bride. It's a verse in the Song of Songs, and we explained that in the first class, why it's called the Song of Songs and so on, and what the meaning of this verse is. But just, you know, the basic setup is that the world was created sort of as a garden, you know, a garden of pleasure, a garden. When I say pleasure, I don't mean physical pleasure, but spiritual delight. It was a garden of delights. That's why it's called Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. Eden in Hebrew means delight, the garden of delight, where it's spiritual delight. It's not talking about physical delights. Nevertheless, as we know, initially, the divine presence was primarily in the lower worlds. The Ikashchina, it says, the main aspect of the divine presence was manifested precisely in this world. That was the whole purpose of its creation, in fact. That was the whole purpose of creation in general. And the purpose of creating such a world was that Adam would, through his service, his divine service, would actually reveal this and completely subdue the forces of evil. Unfortunately, that actually did not happen. In fact, the exact opposite happened, and he sinned with the tree of knowledge of good and evil, which we discussed a little bit. There's much more to discuss, I'm sure, but we did discuss this a little bit in previous classes. And with 7 subsequent generations, or 6 subsequent after Adam, including Adam's 7 generations, they pushed away the divine presence from this world into further and further spiritual worlds, so that it became subsequently much more difficult to be in touch with divinity, with godliness. The work of 7 generations after that, after the screw up of, excuse my language, of 7 previous generations, the generation that started with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, etc., 7 generations brought down the divine presence once more from the 7th heaven to the 6th, to the, and so on until Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, brought the divine presence back down to this world, and he brought it into revelation. Of course, it was all God's doing, but this was the plan. At the time of the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, 2448 was in Hebrew calendar was the year, and since then, right after that, he was given the command to build the tabernacle in the desert, and subsequently the temple, and that's where the divine presence was revealed. One of the ideas in the tabernacle and later on in the temple was the concept of korban. Korban means a sacrifice, but it's also from the word karov or kiruv. And the kiruv, the closeness, the word kiruv means closeness. The closeness had to come from you. So the concept of an animal sacrifice was not to appease the gods or whatever, or to appease God. It was to bring oneself closer. How do you bring yourself closer in this way? By identifying with the animal aspect of the sacrifice. In other words, understanding that we too have an animal soul, an animal consciousness. In other words, a self-seeking, self-indulgent consciousness that when this was slaughtered, shechted is the word in Hebrew, when it was when the shchita, the shechting, the slaughter of this animal was done, there was supposed to be a meditation on the way things were supposed to be with our own animal souls, that we were supposed to rectify our animal souls by letting its blood out. The blood is the called in Yiddish the koch, the burning, the boiling of the blood. You know, the boiling of the blood, the passion of self-indulgence, of self-interest, and so on. So that was all. That was all the purpose of the sacrifice. But now we do not have the sacrifices anymore, since we don't have the temple. After the first and second temples were destroyed, we don't have that anymore. And the way we offer these sacrifices is essentially through prayer. Right? It's essentially through prayer. And what does prayer accomplish? Prayer is supposed to attach us. The whole word for prayer, the word for prayer in Hebrew, tefillah, is from a similar word to binding, tofel klicheres, or binding or layering. Tofel klicheres means when they put a glaze on a pot, on an earthenware pot, that glaze on the outside is called tofel klicheres. So tefillah, the idea of prayer is to bond. But what it does at the same time as we're bonding, it gets rid of, or one of the purposes is to get rid of, sorry, let me just switch that off. Is to, one of the purposes of prayer and cleaving to God is to raise ourselves up above this animal quality that we have and become essentially more human. In other words, we have to get rid of the animal part of ourselves, or elevate and sublimate the animal part of ourselves. And in that way, we become more divine than simply human. A person becomes more divine. Why? Because he has a divine soul, as we explained in previous classes. So we're now on chapter 4. And unfortunately, something that happened last time that I was actually sort of unaware of, and I think no one made me aware of it, unfortunately, was that I did not, for a lot of the time, I did not have the shared screen on, so you couldn't really see the text. I hope everyone can see the text now. You can see this in the text? Yeah? If I forget to put the text on, just let me know, okay? Since I'm not getting an answer, I'm getting worried here that I'm talking to myself. Anyone there? Hello? Write in the text in the chat box. Yeah? Yeah, you're there. Okay. You can't see, oh no, you can't see it? You can see the text. Oh, okay, good. All right, so here we are. This is chapter 4. Chapter 4, Basi LeGani I Came to My Garden. Good. Okay. Let us continue. Hi, Carla. Long time no see. Okay, let's continue. So, though as stated above, the world obscures godliness. The world obscures godliness. This is a very important concept, because actually the word for world in Hebrew, olam, the word world, implies obscuring something. The word world, olam, comes from the same word as he'elem. He'elem means concealment. In other words, to create a physical world, in order to create, sorry, not a physical one, in order to create a physical thing, so the divine infinite light has to be obscured. In order for there to be a finite thing, the infinite has to be obscured. The truth is that the infinite is always there, but it's obscured. So the world itself obscures godliness. When you look at the world around you, you don't really notice godliness, unless you're aware that the whole point of the world is to obscure. And we have to look for the inner core that's not obscured. Okay, i.e. the spirit of folly. What is it in a practical sense that obscures godliness? That's the spirit of folly stemming from the animal soul. The animal soul is naturally foolish because it's naturally only self-seeking. And all an animal is worried about generally is feeding its stomach. I think I mentioned this last time, an analogy. You don't ever see a cow sitting down and wondering like how it got here and what its purpose is in the world. No, it just eats and then goes to sleep and gets up and eats and goes to sleep, procreates and sleeps and so on. Okay, so the animal soul, which is only self-interested and self-indulgent, can obscure the light and truth of the godly soul. But when it does obscure the light and the truth of the godly soul, what aspect of the light and the truth does it obscure? It affects only the emotions, the midot, the emotional attributes of the godly soul, but it's not its essence. The godly soul has 10 powers. It has an essential core, and that core uses the various powers, the 10 powers of the soul, which correspond to the 10 sfirot, the 10 divine emanations, the 10 sfirot, to express itself. But the powers of the soul are not the person himself. Just like his arms and his legs are not him. Yes, it's a very difficult life if one has to live without arms and legs, or without an arm or a leg. An extremely difficult life, and I don't envy anybody. And hats off to those people who, in protecting others, lost a limb or whatever. But nevertheless, it doesn't detract from the person himself or herself. They still feel themselves to be who they always were. Similarly, the emotional qualities, although they're much closer to the soul than the limbs are to the soul, nevertheless, the emotions of the soul are also regarded as secondary. They're not the essence. Okay, so it affects something that affects the animal soul, only affects the emotional qualities of the person, the emotive attributes, but not the essence of the soul. The bond of the soul with its divine source is alluded to in the phrase, Yaakov, Jacob, is the cord of his inheritance. In other words, is attached. His inheritance doesn't refer to Jacob's inheritance, it refers to the divine soul which attaches us to God. That's the cord of his inheritance. So that is called, that's essentially the soul. The soul is the cord of the inheritance. In other words, the connection of the soul to God is compared to a cord comprising 613 strands. Why 613? Because 613 is the number of commandments in the Torah. The Torah is the Bible. There are 248 positive commandments, 365 prohibitions, altogether 613, called Taryag. And therefore the connection is through the 613 cords, or the 613 strands of the main rope that connects us. Okay, so the cord is the soul itself. It is soul that connects a Jew to God. It also connects, obviously he's just talking here about, he's translating it the way it is in the Hebrew. But the soul is that which connects anybody to God. The 613 strands, or the 613 individual faculties, he just says faculties, but individual faculties of the soul that are spoken of in Tanya chapter 51. Tanya is a famous work. Chapter 51 speaks about the 613 different connections of the soul. Therefore, everybody can find one particular connection that really, really appeals to them. There are some who find that connection through charitable acts. There are some that find that connection particularly through intellectual inquiry. There are those that find their connection through prayer of the heart, and so on and so forth. And different people have these different connections. So there's 613 of them, and there's no reason not to be able to find some kind of connection, and one that we can. Not that we shouldn't focus on all of them. We should focus on everything that we can. You connect in every way possible, but one becomes your special thing, so to speak. And we know that there are many people that you just see this about them, that they have this special connection to certain activities, certain actions. I have a friend who's very, very involved with charitable work. When I say charitable work, it doesn't mean giving charity. I'm sure he does that too. But he provides meals for people who are bedbound and for older people and visits, and he takes them to hospital when they need to go to the doctor or whatever. I mean, he's got a whole organization now that takes care of these kinds of things. And I'm sure that there are in many communities, there are such things. From what I understand, the Salvation Army was also that originally and may still be. Again, there are many, many ways in which one can connect. Usually, each person has one particular connection that really appeals to that person. In any event, if you want to see more about this, go and look for the Tanya in English, chapter 51, or in Hebrew. This metaphor can be better understood in terms of the teaching of our sages in the Talmud, Tractate Sanhedrin. Every person, every man, it says every person is obligated to say, for me was the world created. Now, that sounds a little bit egotistical. For me, the world was created. Let's not mistake it. This doesn't mean to say in an egotistical way. What it means to say is exactly the opposite. For me, the concealment of godliness was created for me to illuminate, as he goes on to say. As we have seen, the word in the Holy Tongue for world has the same root as the word for obscurity. For the very existence of the world conceals godliness. So in other words, a person has to take the responsibility for the obscurity of godliness in his section of the world. Let's put it that way. Perceived from this perspective, the above statement teaches that every person is obligated to say, when it says every man, that's just a direct translation. It should be every person is obligated to say, for me was God's initial self-concealment and self-limitation created. God hid himself for my sake, for me to discover. If everything was just, hunky-dory on the surface of it, just as it was in the beginning of creation, God talks to man, he doesn't think anything of it, and next thing you know, he's disobeying already. Sounds like one of our kids. But in any event, the idea is that the self-concealment is created now so that we can seek out, we can search out godliness. That makes it what the Zohar talks about, what is called Nahama de Kisufa, the bread of shame. What's the bread of shame? Is when you get things for free. You get things on the food stamps, basically. Now, don't get me wrong, there are people who, for no fault of their own, cannot afford food and they go on food stamps. I'm not criticizing that in any way. But there are plenty of people, unfortunately, who can certainly afford food stamps, who are still making good use of them to buy all kinds of other things that they don't need, cigarettes and various other things. Let's not get into it. But in any event, the Helem, the concealment was created for me. God hid himself so that I should work for it. I shouldn't get free bread, the bread of shame. I want to be able to say, no, I worked for that, and therefore I deserve it. It's not that it was just handed to me on a platter by someone else's hard work. No, I want to be able to say that I achieved this. This was my work. I worked to uncover the godliness that is hidden in the world, hidden in creation, hidden in myself, and therefore I do the work necessary in order to reveal it, in order to open things up. Okay. So I should seek the divine element within the world and elevate it. If it's in the world, I have to elevate it. If it's within myself, I have to uncover it. Okay. So man is so structured. If there's any questions along the way, please feel free to write in the message box and the chat box, and I will hopefully see it and answer your question as soon as possible. So man is so structured that he has in other words, he's structured in such a way that he has 248 organs and 365 sinews. 248 organs, this is the heart, the soul, the liver, and so on and so forth, the eyes, the organs of hearing, they count them up to 248. I don't want to go into it now, it's obviously beyond the scope. And 365 sinews and veins and various other things, a total of 613 components. Universe, which is a macrocosm of man. Man is the microcosm, the universe is the macrocosm. Therefore, parallels the structure throughout all its spiritual realms. All its spiritual realms. In other words, there are 4 primary spiritual worlds, actually 5. 5 is a meta realm. The 5th world is a meta world. But the 4 spiritual worlds, which are called Asiya, Yetzira, Bria, Atzilut, those worlds, should I write that down? Anyone want me to write that? The 4 worlds? Yes, no? All right, I'll just write it quickly over here. Yes. All right, I'll just write it quickly. So the highest of the world is called the world of Atzilut. As you can see, my drawing skills, my mouse skills are not great. All right, that's Atzilut. Especially I'm writing with my right hand. I'm actually ambidextrous, but writing on a flat surface is not my and I'm writing with my right hand now. Yeah. So it's Beria. That's the Atzilut, Bria, Yetzira. Yetzira. Each on there. Okay, and Asiya. Right? Those are the 5, and those are the 4 worlds. And then the top world, the world that transcends all of those, is the world of Adam Kadmon, it's called. I won't write it now because it's no rule left off. No, just let's call it Ak, right? Ak. Adam Kadmon. Right? Those are the 5 worlds. And these are parallel by 5 levels of consciousness. There's 5 levels of the soul, or 5 levels of consciousness. The Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechida. Yechida is the highest level of consciousness and corresponds to the world of Adam Kadmon. In any event, the various faculties of the soul and the various levels of the soul correspond to the 5 worlds. Okay, let's go back to share screen. Blah, 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 blah. Okay, there we go. Now what happened to the chat? Disappeared. There was a question, Ernest. Like a chess game that's presented to us an obligation to work through the complexities of chess being outward expressions known as attack and the merciful options, along with chess being designed for more than one. Yeah, that's an interesting analogy. An interesting analogy, yeah. Yeah, with one proviso, the goal of chess is in a sense trivial, but obviously the goal of life is not trivial, but there's many parts, there's moving parts to it. And yes, there's more than one partner, and we're always facing the opposite side. And yes, the idea is to capture the forces of the other side and put them off the board and move forward until we checkmate that king, yes? Get rid of it altogether. Yeah, it's a very good analogy, actually. Okay, so let's continue then. So the universe, which is a macrocosm of man, therefore parallels the structure through all its spiritual realms. Again, the spiritual realms are the worlds that we just discussed. Throughout all the stages in the progressive descent and self-concealment of the divine light. So throughout all the stages in the progressive descent and self-concealment of the divine light, these are the worlds. Each world that we mentioned is progressively lower, progressively more concealment than the world above it. So the world in which we live, which is the lowest aspect, the lowest counterpart of the world of Asiya, godliness is mostly concealed. Very little revelation. In any event, our purpose is to reveal the godliness in the world. For this reason too, since it is the soul that connects a man's body and environment to God, the soul likewise has 613 faculties. And there are 613 commandments, mitzvot, dependent on them. Right, so the 613 faculties, and each one of those faculties has a mitzvah, a commandment associated with it in order to refine it and clear the blockage, so to speak. I'll explain this a little bit more. These 613 faculties of the soul are the 613 strands of the cord connecting man to God. In other words, the cord, so to speak, of the soul which connects man to God, and establishing unity between them, just as the body of a cord that is suspended from above connects both ends. Okay, so the cord connects both ends of the cord, and there's one end tied up above, there's one end tied down below, and we have this connection. We have this channel, in other words, this channel of connection, of many connections actually, to godliness, and it's not only one connection. Thank God it's not only one connection, because if it was only one connection and that one got severed somehow or another, as we'll speak about, then we wouldn't have any other connection. He's going to speak about this shortly. Similarly, with the cord of the soul, the upper extremity is connected to God. In Kabbalistic terms, the final letter Hey of the four-letter name of God is connected to the first three letters. All right, I have to explain this. Back to the whiteboard. Okay, clear all drawings. Here we go. Okay, so the divine name in Hebrew is written as follows: Yud, Hey, Vav. Now, why am I putting dashes between them? Because you shouldn't write the divine name for no reason. Even if it's to teach, we should be like separated. So Elisheva asked, how do we shine our light and draw the godly light to us? He's going to explain that. We'll get there. We'll get there soon, Elisheva. Okay. So we were saying that the final Hey of the divine name, that final letter, that letter Hey, which corresponds, I guess, to an H, yeah, is connected to the other three. But the final Hey is actually the life force of this world. The way this works is that this letter Hey is the world of Asiya, right? This letter Vav is the world of Yetzirah. That's the world of Yetzirah. This letter Hey is the world of Bria. The letter Yud is the world of Atzilut, right? The world of Atzilut, the highest world that we just spoke about. And the thorn on top of the Yud is, when in Hebrew writing, when you're in script, it's actually, the letter is written sort of as a kind of a square with a thorn on the top and a thorn on the bottom. That's more or less what it looks like. Not great, but it's more or less what it looks like. Okay, so that Yud has a sort of a thorn on the top, and that represents Adam Kadmon, right? That thorn would be Adam Kadmon, right? Or Ak for short. That's Adam Kadmon. Okay, that's the thorn on top of the Yud. So in any event, this is the life, this is what gives the world of Asiya its life. It's, this, the final Hey is what gives the world of Asiya, and the lowest aspect of the world of Asiya is governed by this letter Hey, right? But the Hey ought to be connected to the other three letters. Otherwise, there's a sort of just disjointment. Things are disjointed. Okay, we'll get back to that soon, and we will go back to the text. Okay. So similarly with the cord of the soul, the upper extremity is connected to God. In other words, the Yud, or the thorn on top of the Yud, is connected to God. And the final letter Hey of the four-letter name of God is connected to the first three letters, and that's our life force. But it's connected to the first three letters. The lower extremity of the cord of the soul is bound below, i.e. the lower reaches of the soul that are known as the reflection of the soul, but not the essence of the soul. They're really, in a sense, the reflection of the soul, are enclosed in the body and give it life. So the life force of the body is that final letter Hey, and it should be connected to the other three letters. And the first letter is connected all the way above to God. Okay. So through this explanation, we can understand the above mentioned verse. Yaakov is the cord of his inheritance. What does it mean? The name Yaakov is not only the name of the patriarch, but also refers to his descendants, the Jewish people, also called Bnei Yaakov, the sons of Jacob. That's us, the Jacobites in a sense. Although that, I think the Jacobians or Jacobites was a party in 18th century England, or I think. Anyway, whatever. Never mind. The name Jacob is not only the name of the patriarch, Jacob, but also refers to his descendants. Okay. So this name comprises two elements. The letter Yud in Jacob, the letter Yud in the name Jacob, comprises two elements. sorry, the name comprises two elements. The letter Yud stands for the name of God, because the name of God begins with the letter Yud, as we just saw. And the remaining three letters, Akev, Ein, Kuf, and Beis, means Akev, or a heel. In other words, that little tiny letter, the first initial letter of the divine name, which shows the highest level of godliness, actually is connected to the Akev, connected to, let me just get your chat here. Okay, I will get back to your question in a minute, Yael. I'll get back to the question shortly. Let me just finish the idea here. So the highest level is brought down to the lowest level. In other words, the very highest level is attached to the very lowest level, because the name is a single name. Okay, Yael asked the question, Adam Kadmon is essentially the concept of ayin, of nothingness. So how could that thorn be attached, be connected to Adam Kadmon? Let me go to my drawings here. Unfortunately, I'm not that great at drawing, as you probably noticed, but I will show you. Let me just draw the letter Yud the way it's usually, or at least more or less the way it's drawn. Okay, so that would be the letter Yud, and then there's a thorn at the bottom, but there's a thorn at the top as well. It's called a thorn, a kotz, right? But the kotz, the thorn, this thorn, in a sense, tends to infinity. In other words, what you can see of it is only that it is a thorn, but it's sort of a little bit thicker at the bottom. It's thicker, and then it goes thinner and thinner and thinner until it stops, right? But it represents the idea of going towards nothingness. It goes towards nothingness. So the thorn on top of it over here is only, you're right, it's not Adam Kadmon itself, but it's the beam of light, so to speak, that comes out of Adam Kadmon from a state of nothingness into the world of Atzilut, which is represented by the Yud. Okay? I hope that's clear. Good? We're all good, Yael? Okay. Very good. Okay, so back to share screen. Okay, there we go. Okay. Through the cord of the soul, even those individuals who are at the humblest of levels, even the heels, so to speak. In other words, people are on the level of the heels. And interestingly enough, it says that before the Messianic era, most of us, the 99.999% of us probably, are on the level of the heels, the lowest and most insensitive part of the human body. Yeah? Okay. So, even the individuals who are at the humblest of levels, even the heels, so to speak, of the Jewish people, are firmly bound to the very essence of God. Because after all, it is one body. It's, even if the heels are the lowest part of the body, but it is one body, so to speak. In other words, your soul, even though we divide it into 5 aspects, is nevertheless one composite thing altogether. Right? Just as the heels is also part of the body. They might be the lowest, and they might be, that's true, if you ever hurt your heel, yes. Ever hurt your heels, it's bad news and a lot of pain. That is true. So therefore, you can feel that, actually, interestingly enough, they do say that the most sensitive souls amongst us, like the people who are called tzaddikim, righteous tzaddiks, are able to feel the pain of the spiritual pain of people who are on the level of heels, even more than they can feel it, because they understand the context much better. Just imagine that. That's why sometimes you'll find that tzaddikim are going on fasts for weeks at a time. I mean, they eat at night or whatever it is, but only once at night, and then fast an entire day and can go on for sometimes weeks, trying to help out the spiritual errors of other people or whatever. I mean, there's other ways of doing it as well. Fasting is not necessarily something that is looked upon in current Jewish life as something we should be doing. The Arizal was very into it, and previous generations, but our generation is not It's not the way to go about it. It's the body's too weak. There's much better ways of doing it, much more productive ways of doing things than fasting. Okay, so that Ramadan kind of, kind of during the 3 weeks, there's some people that are on religion, right? There are some people that used to fast during the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks is a period of mourning for the destruction of the temple from the 17th of Tammuz to the 9th of Av. Those are the months, but during the summer months, very hard to fast, and they are too fast the beginning and the end. Some people fasted every day of those 3 weeks. All right, let's continue. Let's talk about good things. Let's talk about celebrations. In any event, through the court of the soul, those individuals who are at the humblest of levels, in the heel, so to speak, are firmly bound to the very essence of God and are able to realize the potential as part of his inheritance. Even a young child who doesn't have any understanding or knowledge because they haven't developed yet, they're just, newborn, is nevertheless a child of God. Okay. Yeah, that's right. Rabbi Nachman used to fast tremendous amount, yes. And he said he wishes he did not maim his body like he did. Yeah, and he passed away fairly young as well. So when a Jew denies God or commits a sin punishable by kares or karet in Hebrew, excision, he affects the totality of his connection. He touches the very essence of the soul. So it is possible to actually for a person to cut themselves off. Interestingly enough, during temple times, if a person cut themselves off by transgressing in such an egregious way, such a serious way, that his soul was actually cut off from its root, in temple times, there was nothing you could do about it. Once it was done, it was done. Interestingly enough, in non-temple times, in our times, in the times of the exile diaspora, it is possible to reconnect. It is possible to reconnect. That is done through what is called tshuva, repentance. We'll get there. Okay, this is alluded to in the verse. Your sins have made a separation between yourselves and your God, i.e. between yourselves and the godliness within your specific soul. So that can be done on a smaller basis by cutting one of the cords. In other words, you transgress one of the prohibitions, or a person, not you. A person transgresses one of the prohibitions, and then he cuts that part off. But it's possible to cut off the entire thing. As is well known, nothing can obscure the connection of the essence of the soul, and that is talking about now. Unfortunately, in temple times, there were things that could obscure. But these are things that are not for us to really understand that well, because this is all in the divine realm of things, and it's forgot to make those decisions, not for us. When it says that he maimed his body, he didn't actually physically hurt it, but he physically hurt it by a tremendous amount of fasting. Sikufim, it's called. Yeah, it's not for us, not for our generations. I was scolded against doing it because I get really sick. It's my pacemaker. I help many folks, but I hurt myself. There are other ways. Yes, absolutely. Don't fast more than you have to. And even when you have to, make sure that you drink enough beforehand to be able to survive it. And, don't do foolish things. There's no... the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who I regard as my Rebbe, my spiritual leader, the Lubavitcher Rebbe said on many, many occasions, the vessel that you have been given has been given to you as a gift by God, and why would you want to destroy it or harm it or in any way? The body is a vessel that was given to you, and you have to look after it and use it. Use it properly, and that's much better. Using it properly is much better than fasting, and that's in fact what we're talking about. We're talking about the dominating of the godly soul over the animal soul. And the animal soul wants that. The animal soul itself wants to be tamed and led by a human being, because it's much more productive that way, and it knows it. Yeah, of course your intent was not to hurt yourself, but it happens, huh? Yeah. All right, let's continue. For this reason, when the totality of a soul's connection is threatened by certain categories of sin, the individual concerned senses that he would therefore become separate from godliness. And as has been said above, no Jew is willing or able to thus be severed from God. He therefore stands up staunchly for his Jewishness and fights. Sometimes a person was willing to give up their life at the stake or in various other places in order not to cut his soul off from godliness. And even if under duress a person did sort of acquiesce, that would not really be counted. But in any event, let's see. Other sins, however, such as those not punishable by excision, affect only particular strands of the cord in the above metaphor. When the same individual is confronted by such sins, they do not arouse a powerful response within him. Because if a person realizes he's about to be cut off, that's a tremendous, overwhelmingly powerful response. But it should be that even a weakening of the connection by a single transgression should also elicit a powerful response. In any event, when one transgresses one of God's commandments, whether positive or prohibitive mitzvah commandment, one strand of the connecting cord is snapped, robbing that particular faculty of the soul of its connection with God and weakening the entire connection. Again, as I said before, this can be in our times reconstituted, it can be rebuilt. And that's something that we have to do. You know, a person needs to take stock at least once a year, but preferably more than once a year. Preferably every night, in fact. One is to take stock of one's soul. Where are you up to today? What did I accomplish? What did I fail to accomplish? And make decisions for tomorrow. And this should be on a grander plan for the month, for the year, and so on and so forth. Okay. However, since only particular strands are cut, the individual will not react as strongly because it doesn't feel that this is the connection, the ultimate connection we soul to God. You know, it's a strand. He doesn't really notice so much. In these matters, the emotions of the animal soul conceal the emotions of the godly soul. The godly soul also has emotions, and the emotions of the godly soul, love of God, awe of God, love of one's fellow being, and so on and so forth, become tainted by the love of the animal soul for, let's say, chocolate, pizza, ice cream, and so on. You become insensitive to godliness because you become more sensitive to the physical world. If you could focus on one strand as needed, you would be able to, yes. There's a book, if you want to get it, well, I don't think it's in English. If you can handle the Hebrew, it's called Sefer Haredim. The Sefer Haredim, where he discusses all 248 and 365 mitzvot and how they connect to the soul and what action is required and so on. Okay. So, thus they can bring an individual to sin. Because the emotions of the animal soul can conceal the emotions of the godly soul. A person can lose his cool completely, get really, really angry, blow it entirely, and God forbid, come to very serious things through anger or through whatever, and they can bring a person to an individual sin. Yes. This is the work of the spirit of folly that derives from the Sitra Achra, from the other side, the opposite side of holiness, from the unholy side of the universe. The spirit of folly, it's foolishness because we know it's harmful for us. We just don't think about it. We let habit take over. We let animal reactions, animalistic reactions take over. If you ever saw somebody who, before they open their mouth, actually thinks about what they're about to say, it's quite an experience to see. Most people are not like that, as we know. So, it conceals the light of spiritual truth from a person until he is no longer light sensitive. In other words, he's not even aware that there's, she is not even aware that there's a spiritual truth embedded over here. And therefore, the person sinks lower and lower until they can transgress even the prohibitions of the Torah. This all stems from the spirit of folly as explained above. So it's possible to transgress, and the transgression is because of a spirit of folly, and the spirit of folly is powerful because we don't stop and think. We don't control ourselves and think and take a proper accounting of ourselves at the end of a day, at the end of a week, a month. This is an important thing. And there are people who actually spend serious amounts of time actually doing this. it's quite a in the end an uplifting experience. Let me just explain something. There is a prayer which most people today do not observe. It's sort of the fifth prayer, the fourth prayer of the day, which is called the fifth prayer of the day, which is called Tikkun Chatzot, the rectification of midnight. It's the point in time which joins night and day, and it also joins night and day in a spiritual sense. Night being the darkness of the soul, and day being the light of the soul. So, at that point in time, at midnight, the midnight is not necessarily 12 o'clock. It depends on your time zone, whatever it is. The concept of tikkun chatzot, of rectifying the middle of the night, is a time of tremendous cheshbon hanefesh, what's called cheshbon hanefesh, self-assessment, where we assess what our situation is spiritually, and we make, most of us do this before going to bed at night, which you're supposed to do then too. But the difference between going to bed at night and Tikkun Chatzot, midnight prayer, is that going to bed at night, when you go to bed, that's more a review of the day. Tikkun Chatzot is more a view to tomorrow, like what are we going to be doing tomorrow? Okay, so Ernest, the Sitra has totally thought of everything from start to finish. Brititke, how man is, and responds. Did God design the Sitra Achra? And if so, whoa, because it's good for us. Yeah, good question, isn't it? The Sitra Achra, which means the other side, is called also Melech, Zakein, Uksil. It's called an old and foolish king. The classical image of this is the serpent in the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. But yes, ultimately it is good for us. Ultimately, we are able to overcome this. If the challenge would not be a worthy challenge, then what would we feel any sense of achievement? Would we feel any sense of challenge at all? Things are created in such a way that every person has to challenge himself on, basically 24/7. Now, I know that's not easy, but ultimately, we have a lot of victories along the way that we don't really recognize. There are a lot of victories. Just for example, let's say, I don't know, let's say a person overindulges in food, chocolate cake or whatever. By it's not a sin, but it's indulgence. So if such a person decides, like, I'm gonna, eat less chocolate cake, or, smoke less, or drink less alcohol, or yell at my kids less, or whatever, that kind of thing, yell at my husband or my wife, and that's already, it's a step. It's a battle. It's not the battle. It's part of the battle. It's not the whole thing. You might have won that battle and still have not finished the war. And then there's more battles that go on. Until a person reaches the level of a tzaddik, which demands quite a lot of work, believe me. So unless a person reaches that, there are going to be struggles. Going to struggle, like, we're going to go through struggles most of our lives, probably all of our lives, and we shouldn't necessarily welcome the struggle, but that's part of life, and we have to recognize that it's part of life, and deal with it accordingly. Instead of feeling sorry for ourselves, let's use the tools we have, and there are plenty of tools. And be wise about how we go about doing what we need to do. Okay, I'll get your question in a second. Yael, let's just do the summary. The above chapter explains how the spirit of folly can cover on only the emotions of the godly soul. It cannot conceal the essence, nor its essential connection with God. Okay. If anyone actually wants, let me just copy this and put it in the message box, and then you can copy it if you want, and go there yourselves so that you can look at it, and you just go for previous to the previous chapter, or and then next to the next chapter, and so on and so forth. Yeah. Okay. All right. So yeah, so this myself wakes up, my body wakes up, usually focus on a section of the Torah, and Hashem to please assist me to learn that section. I do. Somehow at a point I fall back to sleep, but way kind of different in the morning. Yeah. I once had a spiritual mentor who described this very graphically. He said, if you've ever watched a dog when you go to sleep, when a dog goes to sleep, so if a dog has a particular place where it goes to sleep usually, so it like runs around chasing its tail for a few times, and then just like flops down and goes to sleep, right? He said, if you go to sleep like that, you're not going to wake up as an angel. You're going to wake up as a dog. If that's how you go to sleep, that's how you're going to wake up, right? So the way you go to sleep is very, has a tremendous impact on the way we wake up in the morning. And as Yael said, your first thought of the day, when you wake up, that first thought, to a very large extent, is affected by your last thought the night before, and it certainly affects the rest of the day. So therefore, one has to conjure up, or make sure you have to train yourself to wake up thinking positive thoughts, good thoughts, clean thoughts, clear thoughts, and so on. But in order to do that, we have to go to sleep with the same thing. It's always good to read some spiritual material before going to sleep and thinking about it. Okay, let's finish with the recording. Just 1 minute, because stop recording.